Hey everyone, welcome to today's conversation. Today we're going to be talking about, or at least beginning the conversation with reflecting on our podcasting journey, or really our creative journey that we've been on in the past year and a half or 2 years almost in building out a podcast and trying to grow a community. And with a big reflection on how challenging that was, how triggering that was, how frustrating that was, even to the point of speaking into the microphone for the first time. So I think this conversation is not going to be so much about podcasting, like the art of podcasting, but really more so about the challenge of starting new things and the challenge of having to figure things out on your own, and the importance of pushing through, because you'll come to a point where you are a lot more skillful and knowledgeable in that area. And if you had given up, you never would have allowed yourself to get to that place of recognizing how much you've learned and how much you've grown. So I'm feeling reflective for sure on that. So Daisy, have you reflected on this recently? Because I know we haven't really talked much about it, but I think I've just been reflecting on it a lot, as it's been like a year since I left my job and kind of this whole journey, really.
So I haven't really been reflecting on it, so it'll be a new experience for me to reflect on it in this conversation with new thoughts, but there's definitely a lot to reflect on. I mean, I think of when we first started podcasting in 2021, I think it was, and just how paralyzing it was to just create, to try and have a run of show for the conversation, just how difficult it was. It really goes on par with the conversation we had just a couple of episodes ago about pressure. Like, that has been a huge realization from podcasting for me, the realization of how much pressure I put on something. Because sure, if you're working a job that you're just doing for the money, it's easy to blame, like, oh, it's the job. It's the job that's making me stressed. It's the job that's making me unhappy. But when you start doing a creative project and you realize the same tendencies follow you, to want to give up, to self-sabotage, to feel overwhelmed, to feel stressed, to feel judgmental of yourself, when that gets brought into something that you love doing, that you enjoy doing, that you're doing for fun, it was an uncomfortable realization to have. And it's made me continuously over and over and over and over again face the fact that it's not the external activity. It's not the podcast. It's not the podcast that's making me stressed. It's not the podcast as to why I'm angry or upset or feeling overwhelmed. Like, that is like something that I am experiencing and projecting onto everything around me. And that's been a huge lesson that I've learned from this. If we were to walk away from this today, I would have learned so much. And I feel like the chapter of really learning how to not self-sabotage, while that's a lifelong journey, like, I feel like that's something that I can say I've really learned how to not do, despite having intense feelings come up and observing them. So it feels like now I'm ready to explore a lot of other things with the podcast. One of those things being, am I saying what I want to say, or am I just simply responding? And that's something we can talk more about, that I'm still thinking about. But it's something that just came up as I'm allowing myself to podcast without self-sabotaging. So what's the next step? Since I've freed up so much energy of not self-sabotaging, now that I've learned to not self-sabotage, I have a lot more energy to put into this. So what does that look like? And that's what I'm curious to find out. But ultimately, I'm not doing it out of fear, stress, or anxiety, which is how I've been doing the podcast. Not entirely, but there's been waves of it where that comes up a lot. So to feel confident in how to not self-sabotage and to not work out of fear, anxiety, that is an incredible foundation. And that's like one of the biggest learnings I've had. Not to rest on my laurels too much and say I'll never struggle with that again, because that's not true.
Yeah,
But
like
I
you were
feel
saying,
better
like if you
equipped
were
to
to end
handle
the
that.
podcast now, what would you have learned from it? Because I think that's interesting to think about all the things I learned from it. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about when we first started, and even like moving to Austin 8 months ago and setting up the podcast, and I get triggered and one of us would get annoyed. Like, we were both in such fight or flight. I think the anxiety from moving. Because I'm curious now to reflect on when we still lived in New York and we were podcasting there. Was there as much anxiety involved? It's kind of hard for me to remember. Like when we first started in our Brooklyn apartment, I remember the first recording we ever did, we didn't even know we were going to air it. So we just recorded this episode and like we just talked about this stuff, and it's interesting to look back. Like I feel like I didn't think about one thing I said. I just talked. So it's been interesting. Like somewhere along the journey, I started thinking a lot about what I'm going to say and is this formulated right and how do I sound and how am I coming off. And I think I've been really just trying to find my voice, which has been really interesting. I think anyone in the creative journey can resonate with that. Like trying to figure out like how do I actually want to show up here, or really what is authentic to me to show up in this way? What really resonates with me beyond the fear, beyond the anxiety, beyond trying to prove yourself or get someone else's validation? Like, how can I actually just be myself? Mm-hmm. And I think being the journey of learning how to be myself has required time after time again, like getting frustrated and showing up when I don't want to, and moving forward, even when I'm like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And that's a question that still comes up for me sometimes. But this is reflection point. It's helpful to realize that like the skills I've learned from this are invaluable to life. And that's a really interesting point to have of like when you don't give up, you end up learning a lot. But sometimes the beginning of that process is really excruciatingly painful and confusing and overwhelming.
Well, to answer your question, if we were as anxious when we first started, I didn't realize that when we recorded that first episode that we didn't even plan on airing it. We were just doing it for fun, I guess. I forgot about that. But I remember very soon after that, I think we aired like 2 episodes that we had pre-recorded because we were just in our apartment doing it for fun. And I think it was like months after that we were like, oh, we can launch this thing. It's time to launch it. Because we hadn't thought anything about it because it was something that was cathartic and fun and just an experiment. And we had no expectations. We had no deadline. We had no due date because we hadn't put anything out. So the act of creating was a very safe space because there was no pressure from us, because there was no pressure that we had put on ourselves yet, because we had just decided it was something fun we'd do. And I remember we released 2 episodes at once. And then we were on a vacation when we decided to launch it. And I remember getting back and then we were like, oh, we decided to have an episode release every other week. And immediately that tainted everything. That made everything stressful. It felt like too much. I was deciding, do I plan this? I remember sitting down for episodes because we were still talking about sexuality. And after that episode, we realized we didn't want to talk about that because that wasn't really what we were passionate about. So that first season was really us just figuring out that we wanted to express ourselves, but not knowing how, but realizing we didn't want to do it through the lens of sexuality. That was just something that was our experience. But I do specifically remember us kind of being stressed. It was a Saturday. We were in Brooklyn and we sat down to record something and there was a lot of tense. We were like putting a lot of like pressure and stress on it. And then we were like, okay, we need a break. So we went out, we got lunch, and we were talking about it. We had cards at that point, Wildflowers, when it was still named that. We gave it to the bartender because we were sitting at the bar. And I just remember like we were really heavily invested. We were also at our jobs that we were just kind of like, when we started this, we were kind of like just bored, not bored, but like what more is there to life? We had a lot of space and capacity because our life was very smooth. Like we'd both been in our jobs for a while. Everything was smooth sailing. And I just remember we both were making it a really big deal. And we came back and we recorded. And I guess that was kind of fun to like put a lot of energy into something. But at some point it took a turn where there was a lot of pressure and stress that maybe other stress in our life started to come up. And that's where we're like, it was getting really difficult. It was my relationship to working in a creative field was emerged. My relationship to fear of creating, my relationship to fear of expressing myself, all of this started to arise for me. And I would say like your pressure to get things perfect arised for you So those two things meeting was a catastrophe. They did not work well together. We did not work well together. We were fighting each other because I was working against myself and you were working against me because you were like, I need it to be perfect. And I was like, I need it to be perfect. But we weren't working. We were just putting our attention on making it perfect. Not to mention we were in a relationship. And a lot of our attention went into this. But that really revealed both of our relationships to working. And when that gets brought into a relationship, it's like, whoa, what are we doing here? But I think I'll say one more thing too, and I'm curious what you think about this, is we both were looking to get our value from this, is what I think. I'm curious what you think, at least early on, because it got to a point midway where statistics and all of that stuff, looking for value for sure. And I think that was probably there early on. But what do you think was your driving force when we first started
I feel like I
podcasting,
look back on
and
this
how did that
period of
change?
time and I was just like trying to find myself. Like I was like getting involved in cryptocurrency communities. Like this was, I think during COVID was a big reflective point of wanting to like just be more involved in things. I don't even remember like saying this out loud. I think I just kind of started to take initiative and I joined like a crypto community. I got really into NFTs and I started like at the same time I was getting really into my job and just like getting into corporate real estate and just finding things to put my focus to because I think at the time I was not nearly as grounded as I am now. Like I was always on autopilot. I was always believing my thoughts. I never had the time to actually feel grounded and on the floor and in my body. Like I was, I guess, 27 years old. And sometimes I'm like, wow, it's a little bit, is it concerning of how disconnected I was from myself at that age? But I guess it just was what it was. But I don't remember why we started it. I don't remember why I wanted to start it. I don't remember. I just got obsessed with it though. And I had started creating content on TikTok. And that, I think, I don't even know why I did that either. I feel like this is the era of me just doing shit to do shit because I didn't know what to do. And look, that's what got me here. But then I remember like our friend was like, you guys should start a podcast. You talk so much. It was our friend our friend Lexi when we were in the city that night. And I think I was really at that point in time, it's like I didn't know what I was trying to do, but something was guiding me to move forward with the content and to put myself out there. And I'd say maybe that was like my intuition, but it didn't make sense. Like I had no understanding of it at the time. And that's a really important point to recognize, I think. I didn't consciously think through this. It was something that just happened. Like the podcast just kind of happened. And as it evolved, it started to make more and more sense of like, whoa, like life and reality. And I want to express myself. And there's so much important stuff. And then all of a sudden we're going on psychedelic retreats and I'm expanding my mind so much. And all of a sudden I'm healing all this trauma. And it's like the podcast, I think, became a vehicle. Like it was the first place I think I felt safe in a lot of ways to express myself, or it became a vehicle for me to learn about myself, which got really addicting kind of. I was like, in a beautiful way, like it was just like, wow, I love this. I love talking. I love expressing myself. And then there'd be times where I'm like, what just happened? Like I was in flow state. What was that? Like it was the first time I think I started to learn that I could let go and that I could see what it felt to rediscover this feeling of bliss and being immersed in something that I had really forgotten probably from childhood because I had done the journey of perfectionism and work. But like you said, that slowly started to blend into it. It's like you can be so passionate, but ultimately everything's going to start feeding in when you do it long enough.
I think it's cool to hear that because what a productive experiment. And I don't mean productive in the sense of getting something done, but in the spirit of learning about yourself. It just shows how doing something and not even knowing why you're doing it, you can learn so much from it. But I was thinking, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 months before we moved to Austin, things were very relaxed, I think, with us. So that opened up a lot of space for contemplation of what we wanted and what we wanted to do. And that opened up a lot of space for us to focus on recording more, doing it once a week. We had the space and the capacity to think through what we wanted to talk about and to get into more of a rhythm, to get into more of a flow. And that certainly was happening, especially this summer up until like we left, a few months before we left. Like we were feeling really inspired. We were thinking a lot about the impact we could have with working with musicians or having different people on. Like we were having a lot of creative ideas, is my point. And then I think the move to Austin hit, and like that was super chaotic, that was super stressful. So that was reflected in the podcast. So our capacity for creativity went out the door, but our sense of stress caused us to work through stuff. It seems like this was a very difficult move. Like I know it was. This was a really hard move. Early on, there was a lot of changes that were happening. There was a lot of uncertainty. So there was a lot of anxiety. So that led us to talk a lot about our experience with emotions and working through stuff and like getting through it. We really were documenting like our experience with getting through shit, getting through being in our head. Did I make the wrong decision? I left my safe job. I moved to a new city. I living on savings. Now I'm nannying. Like, and for you, it's having nothing to do but sit here and think about the decision that I made. Like it was just a very challenging time. So that was what was reflected in the podcast. It was something it felt like for a period of time, like we were just doing it. We were on autopilot because our life was challenging and we didn't have the space. So we were just going. And we weren't necessarily connected to ourselves, but then that would cause us to have to do a deep dive into our understanding of like working through stuff. So we'd come back with really insightful stuff. So the podcast, I think moving to Austin got deeper because our experiences were more difficult. So that caused us to do reflection, make sense of it, and to actually not avoid shit, to actually sit through stuff. And that was really the beginning of this, was our tone changed because we changed and we were humbled, for lack of better terms. Like we were humbled. We were grounded and humbled at the same time. Moving provided a huge lesson. So the podcast became an outlet for our insight from learning about this experience and what that was like for us. And it feels like that is closing out. Of course, we still have that experience of going through stuff and talking about that in the podcast, but it feels like we've grounded and settled. So it's like, what direction are we going in next? Now that we have more time back, how will we get inspired? How will things change a little bit? Is how I feel now. So I'm curious what you think about your experience with the podcast moving, or your experience with the podcast changing upon moving, or your relationship to it, and maybe how you see the future looking.
Well, it's interesting
whatever that
when
means to you.
the thing you're creating is basically a journal to express yourself, because in a lot of ways, like the podcast became something that I would look to, or really a place for me to reflect on all of the shit that was happening. And I started to see how important this reflection was, because I started to learn about myself. Like I started to look and listen back. Well, after I got over the fear of listening to myself, and I got over the fear of going back to episodes, which I was really scared to do. And that's something we could also talk about, like how scary it was to hear my own voice. But on the point I'm saying now, like I started to realize I can learn from this. I can create something and then look back on it to have a deeper understanding of myself, to evolve. And when you think of life and you're going along your life and you kind of feel like you're circulating the same thing over and over again, you just feel like you're on the same level of depth. You don't feel like things are changing. You don't really know how to move forward. What I learned from this podcast is that it's possible to create tools in our life that can guide us to help us change and to help us make changes and to make shifts and to work through things. And I think the podcast was a really helpful tool to work through a lot of trauma. It kind of became that. Like unintentionally, our podcast became all about healing and emotions, because I guess that's what we were doing. And maybe I wasn't even as aware of it at the time because I was kind of in denial of it or going through it. Like we were going through a lot of stuff. So it's like being able to express myself on the podcast, it was just, it was like done without thought. It was this inner knowing that I have to keep doing this and I don't even know why, but I need to do this because all of a sudden people are like, wait, that was a beautiful episode. Or wait, we really resonated with what you said. And all of a sudden, like, I started to realize that, oh, these experiences I'm having in life are not unique to me. And popping that bubble was profoundly insightful because it started to help me understand the impact of sharing and the impact of community and the importance of being honest with the world about what's going on in your life because it was genuine. It was like for the first time in my life, there's a vehicle for me to get to know myself. And how interesting that it was in a public way. But I didn't really think that much about that because I started to learn how beautiful this was and it started to feel like an art and a craft, really. So if anything, podcasting became a tool where I realized the profound power of creativity and of crafting and of art, something that I think was missing from most, if not all of my life for most of my 20s.
I really resonate with what you said about knowing that you couldn't stop, despite it being challenging. And like for me, like having all these thoughts about, oh, like who are you to be doing this? Like what you're creating is so bad. Like having these thoughts of insecurity and doubt. And that was hell to experience that for me. So it's like, why did I want to keep going? Why did I want to keep going? Because it was meaningful, because it represented me challenging myself, I guess. And well, I guess when I look back, no matter how challenging something was to work through my own insecurities while creating something and posting it, getting it uploaded correctly, getting notes that matched the description, that was accurate to what it was, no matter how challenging it was, after it was done, I felt really proud of it. I felt proud and connected to what I was creating. And that was a new experience. And it was really a way for me to unlearn my anxiety around creation. Like that's been such a huge thing for me. Like I started working in a creative industry and I ended up working in customer service and sales because I couldn't create without self-sabotaging. So it reminded me that I had this ability to create, and that was cathartic. And it was obviously more helpful it being in my control versus it being a job because there was a lot more leeway with myself. And there was a lot of space for me to learn about myself. And still to this day, there's times where I'm like, why am I doing this? But I still have the urge to keep going because I know just continuing to do something that I continue to learn from will eventually lead me to something meaningful. Not that none of this has not been meaningful, it all has. But I feel like podcasting has been a forced way for me, like you said, for me also to reflect on things. And like how often do we do that? And having the ability to have yourself recorded and to see yourself and see your growth, really. We were listening back to old episodes and of course you're like, whoa, that's me. I sound different. But you can see your own growth as a person. And the podcast has created that meaning in that way. And I think there's still a lot I probably don't understand of why I'm doing it or why we've continued to do it, that I'll continue to learn. But I think it's taught me that you're not going to always understand why you're doing something. And that doesn't mean you should give up, because your thoughts are going to tell you a lot of stuff when you're creating something. A lot of insecurities may come up when you're creating something because it's vulnerable. It's an extension of who you are. And it's scary to put that out into the world because you may have the fear that someone's going to judge you or think that you're X, Y, and Z and not good. And why would she ever create that? That's so bad. What is she doing? And I've definitely learned to not care what people think from doing this. From being so fearful to like let a clip go on my Instagram for promotion to now I don't even think twice about it. So that's a lesson that I've learned. And again, I keep coming back to this point of what is the next evolution of this podcast? What is the next evolution? Because it feels like everything that we've gone through with creating this, really our life, how we have recorded parts of our life, reflections from our life for 2 years, it just has me deeply wondering all the time, like for the past couple of weeks, like what is the next evolution of this? What is this going to evolve into? Because I feel that what am I going to evolve to? Because again, like I have that capacity for the first time in a while to think like that because I'm not in a place where I'm just trying to get everything done. It's like a space to step back and reflect and say, what direction do I want to go now? Because it's a never ending journey. You're always going to evolve. And I think that's what's been cool to see us do is we've consistently evolved. So it just has me thinking, what's the next one? Because I've put so much love into this and I'm ready for it to teach me my next thing.
It's almost like the evolution has been 2 years getting comfortable talking, like getting comfortable being myself. And that's so interesting because that is something noticeable when you go back to like the first 2 episodes, like the content, it's like the context was always there, the content, I mean, and it's like the content's always within everyone. Like there's so much inner wisdom within every single person. It's just a matter of how much are you getting in the way of you accessing that. So I feel like this next evolution that I feel like I'm in right now as we're talking, if we're even to the point of reflecting on the podcast that reflects that we're in a place now where we can have that awareness and understanding to look back and go, oh, okay, we've mentally let go a little bit. We've kind of taken a pause in the sense of trusting the process and just doing it and having more faith in reality and having more faith in the universe and just believing in it. And when you replace your fear with belief, a lot of space opens up to start to really understand from a deep, meaningful place, a real place of why am I doing this? There's times where I used to write our description and I was like frozen. I'd go to ChatGPT because I was like, I don't even know what this podcast is about. And I think that is a very unique process about taking the time to create something. You watch this process unfold of you finding out what it is that you're creating. Like you may not know when you start. And that's why it's so important to move forward despite what the thoughts say. And if there's anything I've learned from this journey, it's do not listen to the reasons that are telling you to give up. Because I think this is the first time in my life I ever saw anything through. I mean, that's not true. Like I took the bar exam, went to law school, but something I actually cared about, or just a more deeper experience of, I'm not going to give up. And I guess that's an attitude I've had in my whole life that kind of got me to this point here. Like, I'm never giving up. But so it kind of reflected my next evolution of life of going from the corporate world to I want to do something else. And creating this platform, we have met so many people from it. We have grown our life. We have grown our minds from this. And to me, like, even if we just this ended tomorrow, to do something simply to expand your reality and to expand your mind in a world where we're so driven by immediate gratification and what can I get from this and external validation and all these things. When you let go of all of that and you heal your inner world and you get to this place where you're like, I'm floating on a planet for a short period of time. How do I want to play around? How do I want to have fun? How do I want to create? And for me, how do I want to make an impact? How do I want to leave an impact on this planet from when I'm not here? So there was something driving me that said it's important to talk about this stuff and it's important to express yourself. So to watch that reason or really that intuition slowly make more sense, it's a beautiful reminder of life, of trust yourself and keep going. It may not make sense now, but it will at some point.
It makes me think of the commonly said phrase, you don't become a success overnight. And what you said, it really makes me think in the process of quote unquote becoming a success, if that's something you can ever actually become, it takes the years, the time, the crafting, the learning, the difficulties. Those are all what make you a quote unquote success. So that's all. Take it for example. If we would have gone viral immediately upon creating this podcast, I can only wonder what that impact on what we created would have been. Would we have gotten lost in the validation? Was it possibly more valuable for us to go through seeing the numbers being really low and then watching them grow and then watching them drop again? Like, does that build more resilience and more lessons that are more deeply inside of you that you learn from versus just saying, this is great? Like, I think of times where we were like, the podcast, it's so good. Oh my God, we're doing amazing things. And I look back on those episodes and I'm like, it's all right. It sounds okay compared to where we are now. But my mentality with the podcast now is not, this is amazing. We're doing such good stuff. My mentality now is like, this is just what we do. And this is an extension of my life. And I don't hype it up because I know the reality of it is not that black or white. It's not just good or bad. My value is not coming from it. It's something that I care about. So I'm not going to be so quick to say it's amazing. It's like, it's more than that to me because it's so deeply connected to my journey, my experiences, and ultimately my learnings, my growth. And something else I thought of, this has been more of a recent experience or realization of learning to be relaxed while working, to really let go of the need to control, knowing that the best output doesn't necessarily come from a process you're deeply controlling. It's more so letting go and maybe podcasting till 9:00 at night, but meaning that doesn't mean you have to be stressed because you can enjoy doing that.
For sure.
That's been a really big
Learning
one
how to show
for
up
me to learn.
relaxed is what allows you to really learn. And I was just reflecting on when you said like the journey of starting it and feeling really anxious about it and looking to kind of, for me, I think it was subconsciously there's a part of me is like, maybe that will make me happy. Maybe that will be it. It's not law, but maybe it'll be this. And I think in the journey of, or in the process of learning to love this, I had to unlearn all of these reasons why I was looking to this for happiness. And really revealing to me that my contentment within is not going to come from anything outside of me. So in the beginning, starting something when I am not connected to myself and I have no foundation, anything I did felt like a tornado or a nightmare. Everything felt like life or death. Everything felt black and white. I couldn't even speak into the mic without checking my hair and how does it look and how is the video going to look and obsessing and being so obsessed, first time sharing on social media and people are going to see me. Like that was a huge hurdle. A huge hurdle. People are going to see what I'm talking about. And so the process of going through all that stuff is so hard, but you get somewhere. Like I think we have this false notion that what's hard in the moment will always be hard. And that stops us from moving forward. Like you will always move forward and you will evolve. And in that evolution will come so much insight. So it's like, it's easy to feel like, oh, what if we had just started the podcast right now? Would it be so much easier? And my response to that is you're undermining how much of this podcast and putting yourself through this helped you to get to where you are now. There's no way to bypass that besides throwing yourself in and actually gaining a new experience. because that's what informs your life.
So much of what we've created from doing this podcast cannot be seen. It's more so a mentality I've learned that I can take into any other work thing. And I almost am like, I want to try something else. I want to do more because I want to apply what I've learned. And maybe that's missing the point. Maybe I just keep applying it to this. I don't know. I don't know. But I definitely feel more resilient from my experience with this podcast because we could have given up so many times. There's so many times where we could have given up. And I'm sure there's times where we could have broken up. Like, what a thing to do. I've been dating for 2 years. Let's start a podcast. Like, decision making there, I don't know, but we did it. And we learned to work together. And it was a long, grueling process of learning to work together. But we really did learn how to work together and how to respect each other despite having very different work backgrounds, both having an extreme relationship to pressure. But there's just so many things that we've learned. I feel like I've learned more from this than the jobs I've had in the past. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because there was no one else telling me I had to do it other than Sophie. But I also didn't want to give up. There were so many driving motivators and it was so damn stressful. But I guess that was just a lesson in how much stress I put on myself. It's an everlasting lesson of just how much pressure I choose to put on myself because I think that it means something about me. And having that awareness has really grown through the podcast. Because to this day, it's not easy for me. It's not just enjoyment. It's not as simple as that. It's something that I'm proud of. It's something that I care about. And the things that you're proud of and you care about aren't always just rainbows. And that's also been a lesson of life isn't just fun. Sometimes the most deep things are enjoyable, but maybe I wouldn't call them fun. And fun was for me avoiding. So this has also made me look at my relationship to confronting and not avoiding. And it's really cool to reflect on this. It feels really good to reflect because we haven't had this conversation. It kind of feels like this conversation we're having, it's taking me back to when we were in Nick Your Brooklyn studio and we were recording. Like it is kind of the casualty of the way that we're talking right now. Like we are just kind of reflecting in a different way on like our specific personal events with this. And I guess that just feels good. Like we're recounting something specifically. And it just feels full circle to me for some reason. I don't know why. It just does. And I think that's really cool because it helps me see where we've came from.
Two things I was going to say.
And where we are.
Do you remember when you told me you didn't want to do the podcast? I forgot when that was. You're like, I just don't know. And there was something in me, I'm like, we're doing this. Or I don't even remember what I said, but I was like, I'm doing this. So you can come along or if not. But I think I always wanted you to do it with me. Well,
it was more so you were like, I want to work with whoever I'm dating. I want to work with that person. And I was like, Sophie, I don't know if that's a good idea. Like, I don't know if I'm really the right person to do that. My relationship to work isn't great. And you were just kind of like, no, I need to work with the person I'm dating. And I was just kind of like, okay, I guess I'll do that. I guess we'll try it out.
In hindsight,
I can't
really
promise you
have no
anything.
idea why I said that because now, I mean, granted, it was my first relationship ever. Like, clearly had my head in my ass. Clearly didn't understand like what that would mean.
Yeah, you clearly didn't understand like how difficult relationships
are.
But
this is why they say like ignorance is bliss sometimes. Because if I had known how hard it'd be, maybe I wouldn't have done it.
That's really funny. Like, cause I like in how I built this podcast, they're always like, I feel like the common thread is like, I was so naive. If I knew it was coming, I would not have started it. And like, that's just so true because if you were to get a window in the next 2 years, like, would you be like, that's a good idea? That doesn't sound, I have gray hairs now. I'm aging. In all seriousness, it's like that where being naive, not knowing is sometimes the greatest gift because That's what allows you to take a huge risk that you don't even realize it's a risk to start a podcast and turn it into like a business with your partner. Like you don't even know how fucking risky that is, but you just hope for the best.
You'll come out somewhere.
And you come out stronger.
I think that's the huge takeaway for me. But yeah, it is interesting. Like you know how something's going to be, and someone tells you, if I had known how this was going to be, I wonder if I still would have done it. But it's almost like that driving force. That's what got you there. So I'm glad that it did. Honestly.
You know, I am too, because if I wasn't doing this with you, maybe I would have given up. I don't know. It was a very interesting experience, but I'm proud of it. I like where we are now. We've built something that I am proud of and want to continue to put love into. I think that reflecting on this and how it's been 2 years, I think of how 2 years has felt like a long time, but 2 years is nothing. Like when you think of someone who has been a radio show host for 40 years, there's infinite lessons. Like 2 years, yeah, that's a solid amount of time to learn something. Like we have learned a lot. But I guess this feels different than any job I've had because we have been consistent and we have done the same thing over and over and over again. And it's been up to us to iterate. Like we're going in blind. We've gone in blind. And we're still kind of blind. We don't know where it's going. We can't control where it's going. But isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting to know that you created this, you made this, and you don't know where it's going to go? And wherever it does go, you get to go with it. And to know that oftentimes things take a long time. Things take time. And it takes resilience to be like, oh, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, it's been 3 years. Nothing's came of this. But what mentality do you have? How are you viewing this? Is it coming from externally what has came from this? Or are you viewing it from an internal stance of how would I be different if I never did this? And that's something that I can't comprehend because this podcast has been so tightly intertwined in my growth in the past 2 years that yeah, it's not been all rainbows, but it's also been the first thing in my life that's forced me to work through a lot of stuff despite it being challenging and to not self-sabotage. So what I've learned has been invaluable and I wouldn't be the same person if I hadn't done this podcast. So whatever comes of this podcast, I know for a fact it has changed me as a person. It's helped me grow and understand my value, what I like, the meaning of life, purpose, building something you're proud of. It's taught me so much and I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't change it at all because I know that I'm a better person. I'm closer to who I am at my core for doing this podcast. That's made me work through so much stuff.
Because really it's been a journey for both of us, but just from me to reflect to you, like watching you evolve throughout it has been really powerful because you've grown in a lot of ways. And yeah, we did learn to work together. That was really, really, really hard. It's hard to work with your partner, and it's also hard when you have perfectionist tendencies and anything anyone does isn't good enough.
Talk about building a complex that's already there. No, for real though, it really makes you learn to work through stuff with yourself and work through it with your partner. So we are better for it. Well, thanks for tuning in. This was a fun reflection. This was a really helpful reflection. It's important to take a pause on when you're creating something. It's really important to focus on why am I doing this? What does this matter to me? What am I getting from this? Because I think that deep knowing is what allows you to keep going forward and to keep getting re-inspired. So I'm grateful for the platform to do that. And I also just want to say, on that note, if you have your phone with you, whip out your Spotify, your Apple Music, wherever you listen to this podcast, and don't forget to rate and review us because we are trying to build that up so that we can find more people and reach more people. So thanks for being here and have a great rest of your day, great rest of your evening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much for being here. It's been interesting to reflect. It's been an interesting conversation and fun. So it's helpful to switch things up and to just Trust your gut as you're going. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.